Hello, everyone. This is our fifth consecutive conversation with people from the International Committee of the Global Energy Association regarding the forthcoming book on the 10 breakthrough ideas for the next 10 years. And today, on behalf of the presidency of the association, we're talking to Dr. Adnan Amin, who is, of course, from the International Renewable Energy Agency and member of the International Committee, and whose idea is very strange indeed. Hello, Dr. Adnan.
Hello, Dr. Belyaev. How are you?
Good. Yes. Well, good. Yourself, I think, given the circumstances, this conversation will never end because the coronavirus thing, let's put it away. We're happy. Now, the strange idea is that we're talking about hydrogen. Now, this is something so less exotic than floating nuclear reactors we were talking about last time round. Everyone is aware what hydrogen is because we all are graduates of secondary school. But isn't hydrogen the substance which occasionally explodes?
Well, yes, but so does nuclear material, and so does gasoline, and so does natural gas. A lot of things have the tendency to explode. I think what's important about hydrogen is what it presents to us as an opportunity as an energy carrier that can help us in the drive for decarbonization as the global conversation about climate change becomes more and more important. And it's a gas. It can be produced by electrolyzers, but it needs an input of energy. And what that input of energy is to produce hydrogen becomes important from the point of view of carbon. But hydrogen has a very important role today, which is that we have a lot of discussion about how power is being produced in the future. Renewable energy has become the cheaper source. Last year, in terms of global capacity additions, new capacity for power, 70% was renewable energy. That's going to be the electricity source predominantly of the future. In that, it doesn't compete with the oil. Where the competition happens is because renewables cannot reach the hard to decarbonize sectors like transportation, housing, aviation, shipping, processing of steel and aluminium. And that's where hydrogen comes in. If you can produce hydrogen at low cost, at scale, and use it as an energy source that can decarbonize those sectors, then the climate discussion becomes very interesting. So I think this is the real moment of opportunity, and that's how people are looking at this now.
Well, I see sparks in your eyes, so certainly I do, and little wrinkles, and you start smiling. So let's go back to my first question. It's a substance which sounds very innocent. Hydrogen, a gene which produces hydro, a gene which produces water. You can't see anything more innocent on this planet than water. But hydrogen per se does explode. How do you transport it?
One of the perceptions that people have is a vision of the Hindenburg ship.
Absolutely.
That caught fire and exploded,
Absolutely.
and then they say, this is hydrogen. Yes, but if it had been filled with natural gas, it would have been the same thing. So I think you've raised a very central issue about the future of hydrogen, which is what is the infrastructure to produce, distribute, and manage hydrogen in the future safely. Hydrogen has to be handled under pressure. It's not like you can fill a gas tank with another tank and take hydrogen around like that. It's a gas. It can be volatile. And there are a number of challenges there. So the first challenge is how do we produce it? And if it presents a huge opportunity for the growth of renewables also, because if renewable power becomes the cheapest source of power and you need electricity to produce hydrogen, you need electrolyzers, which are now coming on stream and prices of electrolyzers are falling very fast, then you can begin to produce hydrogen at scale. But then how do you store it? How do you transport it? I'll tell you about a very interesting conversation I had with the CEO of the gas business of Equinor, the former Statoil in Norway, a couple of years ago, where he saw this meeting, and he was telling me that, Norway has done tremendously well out of its oil and gas resources. But the Norwegians have this kind of puritanical thing, and they feel very guilty about it because it's its contribution to climate. So they want to do something about it. And the idea he had is that there is a massive continental shelf under Norway, which is ideal for carbon storage, if they can use their fossil resources to create what we would call blue hydrogen and sequester the carbon under the Norwegian shelf, they can use their existing gas pipelines to distribute hydrogen at scale throughout Europe. Now, that's a very interesting possibility. The problem with that is that you need massive infrastructure investment to upgrade the facilities. So if you look at hydrogen as opposed to natural gas, hydrogen actually flows 3 or 4 times faster than methane through gas pipelines. The problem is that the chemical composition of hydrogen begins to create a process of embrittlement of the pipelines. So if the pipelines are certain steel material, they come brittle over time and they could potentially leak. So how do we strengthen that infrastructure?
You mix it with natural gas, presumably.
That's one solution, but it's that just delays the embrittlement process really. But there is a lot of discussion about using chemicals, coating the inside of pipelines and creating a new kind of scenario around that. But there can be combinations of natural gas, methane, hydrogen as well. So that's one challenge. But when you get it to the place where you need to deliver it, it has to be stored under pressure. You have to develop infrastructure for that. You need tanks that can hold hydrogen. One of the discussions I had with the Japanese, who put a big bet on hydrogen as a transportation fuel, is that you will need to fuel vehicles. You cannot create hundreds of hydrogen pumping stations because the cost of that infrastructure is huge. So how would you do it? And the idea that is emerging is that hydrogen could actually be a fuel for heavy transportation, for shipping, for aviation potentially, for trucks. And these kind of ships and trucks and planes, you can program in terms of where they refuel, how they move, and so on. And for that purpose, hydrogen could be a very, very effective solution in the future. And my sense is that hydrogen is going to grow very fast now with the cost reduction curves that we're seeing, and will begin to be a serious competitor with oil in the coming decade.
Okay, you were born in Kenya. I was born in Cuba. You got your education in England, so did I partially, but also Montevideo, Uruguay. So you and I have this feeling, other than representing the tribe of globetrotters, we have this feeling of understanding the developing world. What you've just said is very interesting and very promising, but you mentioned Norway. Norway is not exactly Kenya. Germany is not Cuba, etc. Now, when you look at this from the perspective of the developed world, from the perspective of people who are happy to spend more money on environmentally friendly technology, that's one thing. How do you explain this idea? How do you sell it to the developing world?
It's a question of economics. And at the base, I'm an economist. And if you look at it from the economic perspective, we have an energy system now that creates, a form of pollution, which is an economic cost, which is externalized. It's given to others to pay. So people who don't actually use that energy are the ones who are paying the cost of the pollution, either in terms of carbon or health impacts or whatever.
Or deforestation, for that matter.
Or deforestation, indeed. And what you do as you move to low carbon sources that do not pollute is that you reduce that cost to society. So if you look at it from a purely cost perspective, that's a cost reduction criteria that's quite significant. But in terms of finance, in terms of what it costs and what you pay and how that plays out, it's very clear that the technology leaders are going to be the ones that take this forward. So as you said, Europe, Germany and the Netherlands are very much in the lead. France is right there. Japan is beginning to play a major role. The Australians are very interested in hydrogen, the potential of hydrogen. And China is beginning to enter the hydrogen discussion in a very big way. And the Chinese have a huge advantage because they have installed huge amounts of renewable power generation capacity, which is often curtailed, which which means that a lot of their solar and wind at any particular time is not being used. Hydrogen presents the possibility to use that curtailed capacity to create hydrogen, which you can store and which becomes an energy storage medium also. So as the cost reduction happens over time, you'll see this as a potential for developing countries also. The importance of hydrogen, however, in the short term is going to be its ability to decarbonize hard to decarbonize sectors and to reduce carbon emissions in the global atmosphere. That's the real prize right now. For developing countries right now, the best option for power generation is becoming more and more renewables. And given what is happening with the oil market, that hasn't changed.
Let me catch you there. Okay, hydrogen is renewable, period. No, not a period, a comma. It's renewable, yet fossil fuels as coal, oil, and natural gas are needed for its production. So aren't we in a vicious circle here?
You're right. Up to now, the overwhelming majority of hydrogen has been produced by fossil fuels. What we're seeing now is, which is what's so exciting and what's new about this discussion, is that's what you would call gray hydrogen, hydrogen produced by oil, gas, and so on. Coal is a big thing for hydrogen in Australia, for example. We see the advent now of green and blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is hydrogen that's generated from fossil sources, but which you have carbon sequestration attached to it. So you can capture the carbon, store it underground, as the Norwegians are talking about, or other possibilities. That becomes low carbon blue hydrogen. Green hydrogen is hydrogen that's generated by renewable sources. Now, I mentioned one thing to you a little earlier, which is that 70% of new power generation capacity worldwide last year was from renewable energy. That has been a trend for the last 7 or 8 years in a row. In the last decade, the cost of renewables has fallen, solar photovoltaics by more than 80%, wind by around 40%. Today, we're generating power from solar and from wind, which is under $3 US cents a kilowatt hour, whereas new gas, which is the next cheapest form, is producing electricity at between 12 to 16 US cents a kilowatt hour. So these new modern renewables have become the cheapest source of power. As they begin to become more predominant in the system, demand capability, which is what hydrogen provides, and you need a storage capability, which is what hydrogen provides. The articulation of hydrogen and modern renewables becomes more and more a possibility. The other bottleneck has been the issue of electrolyzers. Where are the electrolyzers? Why are they so expensive? I know, for example, talking to the CEO of a very interesting Chinese company that's in smart energy, smart wind turbines, artificial intelligence, Internet of Energy, and so on, a company called Envision, has started to look at the possibility of producing electrolyzers in quantity at low cost. And his sense was that they could do to electrolyzers, the price of electrolyzers, what China had done for the price of solar photovoltaics, which is by reducing it by 80%. When that begins to happen, the low carbon energy transition will begin to accelerate even more.
Well, I'm Russian after all, so I'm a bit frightened by all of this, because you are saying a huge pros on oil and gas and coal, which are produced by this country. And when you say that there are now new technologies which allow to produce hydrogen without applying to coal, oil, and natural gas, you are destroying hundreds of thousands of jobs in this country by saying that. What's the way out?
It's a very interesting thing. And Sergey, I've got to know Russia quite well. And I must say, Russian history, Russian people, Russian culture has become very, very interesting to me. I enjoy it very much, and I'm very happy to be part of this jury for the prize.
Thank you.
But I believe in the intellectual capability and innovation that Russians are capable of. I've met Russians in engineering sector, in the energy industry, who are among some of the best engineers I've seen anywhere in the world. It was told to me by a British person that he said, never underestimate what Russian scientists are capable of doing. The one thing they are not capable of doing is commercializing. So he and his company had actually taken Russian innovation at very low cost, commercialized it, and made a fortune.
Yes, that's
And the
very much the
Russians are
case.
not, and the
Yes.
Russians are not able to do it. And I think that's where you need to pay attention, because what I think the Russia faces is the same problem that many resource-rich countries face. I lived in Abu Dhabi. I go to Saudi Arabia and I work with them a lot. They have the same problem. But if you look at the response of different countries, look at the UAE, they have embarked on a very ambitious program of diversification.
United Arab Emirates. Just let's explain it to someone
yes,
who's not familiar with the acronym. Yes.
United Arab Emirates have embarked on a very ambitious program of economic diversification, creating new areas of value added, investing in new areas, using their oil wealth to create an economy for the future that is not totally reliant on oil. And there was a fascinating talk I attended with the Crown Prince of the UAE. This was several years ago. He doesn't talk that much in public, but this was a very privileged and very interesting discussion where he said, talking about the future of the country and of oil, he said, we know that the time will come soon when we will export the last barrel of oil. And it will not be because we don't have oil. It will be because there's no demand for the oil. And how should we feel at that time? And he said, we should feel happy about it, because what we should do now is prepare ourselves by educating our people, creating an infrastructure for the future, investing in high-tech industries, investing in new types of manufacturing, utilizing the new emerging technologies of artificial intelligence, robotics, and so on, to create a new paradigm for the economy for the future. The Saudis are trying to do the same thing, but in a very difficult environment. They have the Vision 2030. The current oil shock has created a huge financial problem for the Saudis, and that is a little bit shaky. But
they've tripled their VAT, among other things, because their budget was balanced at I think $90 per barrel. The Russian one was, by the way, balanced at 40. So yes, the Saudis are in a difficult position.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have a fiscal break even of $90 a barrel and the current price is 20 or below, you have a serious problem. So, but they have reserves and they have ambition and they want to go in that direction. But the Russians have something none of these countries have. They have massive natural resources. They have huge scientific and technical capability, because the future of hydrocarbons is not going to be a waste by burning them for a little money. It's going to be through value added through petrochemicals and other utilization for this kind of energy source. So I think the real challenge for Russia is going to be, how do we create the economy of the future, and how do we innovate ourselves out of this situation? And let me be very clear. It is my absolute conviction, having worked in this field very intensively for the last 10 years, that the future of hydrocarbons is going to be very different from the past.
Let's see, but let me ask you a very last question. I don't really want to spoil your future, because otherwise we'll cover everything and there won't be anything left for the article, for the
it's not my future. It's not my future. It's the future that we see according to science and projection.
But let me ask you this, and I'll be quoting, because this is a complex question, and to be honest with you, this one was prepared for me by the wonderful staff of the Global Energy Association. Now, researchers from the French Alternative Energies and Atomic Energy Commission have compressed hydrogen to a metal state, METAL. Previously, this was done by scientists from Harvard, where you work now, but as it turns out later, I don't know what I'm talking about here, so I may be exaggerating, but I quote, as it turned out later, they lost the sample. Is it true, by the way?
I wouldn't be able to say.
Okay. According to NASA representatives, metallic hydrogen is very promising. It can be used as an innovative rocket fuel. What can we expect from the new material? Is it really a viable perspective?
I think that there are many, many potential technologies that are out there, including this. But I think that this one is so far out in terms of cost and technical feasibility that the real change is going to come from actually the production, distribution, and utilization of hydrogen in conventional ways, rather than looking for a silver bullet. You know, I found in the energy business, anybody who looks at a silver bullet will end up having that silver bullet destroying their career.
Isn't hydrogen one?
No, silver bullet is a one-off event that creates a new future by itself, and hydrogen cannot do that. Hydrogen can only be a fast-moving element in a dynamic whole picture where there are many pieces of the puzzle.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much indeed, Dr. Amin, for this conversation. And I'm looking forward to getting that chapter of yours and by your colleagues dedicated to the subjects. To be honest with you, I was a bit surprised when I saw so many people from our international committee and from the expert circle suggesting that we write a chapter on hydrogen. And now it looks like we'll have 2.5 chapters dedicated to this material, of which we've all heard since our secondary school days, but which is coming on this new horizon. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Bryljev. A great pleasure to talk to you. And let me say, I'm also working on the geopolitics of the energy transition. The geopolitics are going to change quite dramatically. The conditions of different countries are going to change. And I think that's also an area that we need to give a lot of attention.
Absolutely. Our next chat is going to be about this. Thank you.
Great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.